Good evening, everybody. James Hancock here. I just got out of seeing one of my favorite films of the year, Blond, from director Andrew Dominik, starring the great Ana de Armas. And because this movie's not coming out on Netflix until September 28th, I'll be very coy about the specific details in this movie. And you might be asking yourself, well, how can you spoil a movie that's a biopic based on someone's life, most of which is already very much public record, but the movie's more or less based upon this book, which I have not read, by Joyce Carol Oates. I was so excited to see the movie. I was like, I'm going to rip through that novel before the movie. At any rate, I read a few pages. Maybe one day I will go back, but my list of books that I want to read is unmanageable. But let's stay focused on the movie itself, which is everything you've heard it to be. It is shocking, it is controversial, it's exhilarating, it's hypnotic, it's sensual. It's just this wild, oftentimes grotesque cinematic experience, and it's the kind of experience that we so rarely see in this era of really crummy, tired franchises made for the whole family. Blonde is quite an antidote because it reminds me of like the late 60s when a movie like Midnight Cowboy would get an X rating and then go on to win Best Picture. Or it reminds me of movies like David Cronenberg when he went to the Cannes Film Festival with Crash and shocked the hell out of everybody. This is that kind of movie, but at the same time, Ana de Armas is so gorgeous and so angelic and so hypnotic in her portrayal of this character that you will find it next to impossible to rip your eyes away from the screen. And there were two people in the theater who did everything in their power to ruin the movie experience for all of us. They were chewing popcorn with their mouths open, one piece at a time, for like the first 10 or 15 minutes. So all I heard was them just being fucking animals. And then they indulged in these harsh whispers for the rest of the movie while fucking around on their phones. At any rate, some New Yorkers who go to movie theaters are more, I guess they belong in a cage, but no matter how distracting they were, it could not detract from this incredible movie-going experience where even though this movie is pretty goddamn long, and if you wanted to criticize it, I feel like some people are going to criticize it for the shocking graphic content. I might criticize it for being excessively long, but I would say that for 95% of the running time, I was just completely wide-eyed and enthralled by the experience. And I don't make this next statement lightly, but even if you think you've seen a lot of wild, provocative, controversial movies, there are a few shots in this movie where your jaw will hit the floor and be like, oh my God, I cannot believe I'm seeing this in a Netflix movie. And a lot of controversy was stirred up over the fact that this movie received an NC-17 rating, which is kind of ridiculous. NC-17, it's almost like from a bygone era from the early 90s where they were trying to find a way to release movies theatrically that could have graphic content that were geared toward an adult sensibility, movies like Henry and June, and it was a way of kind of differentiating them from hardcore pornography. But in the era of Netflix, does a rating system even really have any relevance? But I've seen NC-17 movies with far more nudity than in Blonde. And to be fair, Blonde does have a fair amount of nudity, and a lot of it is very pleasing to the eye. But I think what the kind of ratings bureaucracy was reacting to was there's a lot of emotional and physical violence in this movie that a lot of people are going to have trouble watching. I think if you're used to just lying on the couch and kind of letting shows or movies wash over you and lull you to sleep, Blonde is not that kind of movie. Blonde is like an ice pick to the middle of your forehead in a good way if you're into innovative cinema. It's while it's always dangerous to make massive pronouncements after having a great movie-going experience, I think it's safe to say that Blonde is a strong contender for the best movie of the year, strong contender for my favorite new movie that I've seen this year, easily a strong contender for the best movie that Netflix has ever been associated with, and maybe the best movie that Andrew Dominik has ever directed. And I say that having a lot of love for what has come before. He's not necessarily renowned for a huge output because most of his movies do not generate big box office, but Chopper from 2000, very controversial. The assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford basically lost every single dollar that was invested in it, in spite of being arguably the best Western of the 21st century. And Killing Them Softly from 2012, I fucking love that movie, but it definitely underperformed given the genre and the star. I still need to see One More Time with Feeling, his 2016 documentary, as well as his 2022 documentary, This Much I Know to Be True. But I'm going to be watching those next because after seeing Blonde, I want to see every frame of film that Andrew Dominik has ever shot. Because this is one of those movies where basically every photographic device that's ever been conceived by a human being, he just hurls it up on the screen, but it's not for its own sake. It's not just for creating eye candy. He finds a way to use so many different devices to maximize the emotional impact of the story, whether you're talking about different aspect ratios, or switching between color and black and white, or wild, crazy close-ups from angles that you never would have possibly dreamed of. And then there are plenty of other photographic techniques that I don't even have a word for because I've never seen a movie quite like this. But I think Andrew Dominik fans are going to be delighted. I think Ana de Armas fans are going to be delighted. And I think film history buffs are going to be delighted. Whether you like her in bit parts of movies like All About Eve, or you like kind of the color film noir extravaganza, Niagara, or if you like the musical sequences from Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, or if you love the comedy from Some Like It Hot. But this is not a formulaic, by-the-numbers biopic in any conventional sense at all. I mean, if you're looking forward to seeing Marilyn Monroe interact with Billy Wilder, you will see that, but in quite a different way than you might be anticipating. Because there's no getting around the fact that this movie goes all the way in on the darkest aspects of showbiz, whether you're talking about the casting couch, to outright rape, to the horrors of drugs and alcohol. It basically shows how Hollywood in the 50s for a celebrity, it was a wood chipper, it was a meat grinder, and Marilyn Monroe, or the artificial kind of creation known as Marilyn Monroe, which is a huge part of the movie, basically it's eaten alive by the whole process. And Ana de Armas, your heart just goes out to her because she gives this eerie, uncanny performance that is completely, totally fearless, and she's totally unafraid to explore the most savage emotional terrain imaginable. But at the same time, we get some very beautiful moving sequences as well. I mean, if you're a fan of serious theater in the 1950s, theater written by people like Arthur Miller, there's a scene where she and Adrian Brody sit down to talk about a possible role in a play that he's writing, where drama nerds are just going to be doing cartwheels, watching the way they're interacting as collaborators. And I think it's safe to say that Ana de Armas better start clearing off some space on her bookshelves for some serious awards, because right now she's got my vote for all of them. I mean, she just goes all in ways that it's just so refreshing, because we live in this incredibly risk-averse, very almost puritanical era where film and television very rarely go to dark places. And here you have Ana de Armas just absolutely leading the charge with this completely unbridled, oftentimes incredibly erotic performance. And Ana de Armas is no stranger to doing nude scenes in movies, but in a lot of ways it feels like her entire career has been leading up to this, where her acting chops and her celebrity power and her box office power and just her undeniable sex appeal are all stirring together into this intoxicating brew. And there's one scene where she's on a date with Joe DiMaggio where I just sat back in my chair. I was like, she might be the most beautiful person who has ever stepped in front of a camera. I mean, she just glows, but it's an incredibly calculated performance at times that in a strange way will break your heart. Like, just to give like a very, very mild spoiler, there's one scene where she's kind of having an emotional breakdown and her hair and makeup people are trying to get her prepared to do a scene, and we see her from one angle as she's getting dolled up and crying and falling to pieces. Then the camera slowly pans over to the mirror, where by that point she's fully come together. Marilyn has emerged. The illusion has been, I guess, solidified, and she's ready to go in front of cameras, but it's all in one take. And I was like, God damn, Ana, you have gotten really fucking good at the craft of acting. But as a movie buff, I guess what I responded to the most was that here we are in the hands of a completely daring filmmaker who's totally unafraid to use film as a visual storytelling medium to just explode these iconic moments into the most epic scenes imaginable, because a lot of this movie is taking classic photos or classic moments from her life and then embellishing them and fleshing them out and exploring them. I just couldn't believe what he was able to do with a lot of images that we're already very familiar with, like take the behind-the-scenes images of shooting the scenes from The 7-Year Itch, or the scenes of Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe at their home, and he'll take these iconic snapshots and then flesh them out to just these incredibly gripping scenes. Once again, I was drooling while watching this. And when it comes to 1950s Hollywood, a lot of times people look back on that decade as the most squeaky clean decade when it comes to on-screen sexuality or just what was permitted in society at that time. All I'll give away on that front is that you better prepare yourself for some genuinely hallucinatory, oftentimes nightmarish, and oftentimes euphoric scenes involving kinky sex and drugs and alcohol. This is a very raw, emotional, movie-going experience in a lot of ways. And I think that a lot of audience members who are used to feeling completely complacent while watching entertainment, they're not going to know what to do with it, because I feel like we're sadly in an era right now where people seek out very bland, boring content that basically rots your brain and ruins your ability to think critically in any way, shape, or form. And I think a lot of these people are going to be completely incapable of digesting a provocative work of art because we so rarely see them. But the late 60s and early 70s was a great period for that. And the mid 90s was a pretty good period for that as well. Like, there's something in the water in the 90s where foreign film and independent film were exploding in America, and the stars from those two scenes would then kind of sidestep over into mainstream Hollywood. And it was just a really exciting time to be a young movie fan. And right now we just happen to be living in a very boring time. I think people will look back at this period right now and be like, oh yeah, that was like the 1950s all over again. And thank God there are people like Andrew Dominik who push back on that trend. And thank God there are actresses like Ana de Armas who are willing to just put it all out there. She holds nothing back. It's like a fighter that leaves it all in the ring or leaves it all in the octagon. If there's any emotion left in her body after this performance, I don't know how that's possible, because the entire spectrum of human experience, she just hurls it at the screen. And I loved it to pieces, and I can't wait to watch it again. So I realize at this point I've completely succumbed to my tendency to indulge in hyperbole when I've had a good movie-going experience. But it's a little bit like, say you're running around the desert and you're dying of thirst, and somebody finally hands you a bottle of water. You're like, oh my God, this is the best fucking water I've ever tasted. But it's still just water. Sometimes movie lovers who enjoy intense, visceral, kind of overwhelming experiences, we so rarely get them. And I'm just... I hope that Netflix and Andrew Dominik and Ana de Armas will all reap the rewards of this giant gamble that they made, this giant risk that they all took together making this movie. And I don't know if that'll come in terms of total minutes viewed or awards, or just Netflix developing a reputation where filmmakers from a distance will say, holy shit. It might make them pause for a second and think, all right, well, everything going on at Disney right now is completely corporate and completely boring and so predictable, but Netflix seems to be the wild, wild west where a crazy fucking movie like Blond can come to be. A movie like Blond is never getting released on Disney+. But Warner Brothers Discovery, who knows? I'll be very curious to see how the competition responds if and when this movie does find an audience. And there's a very real risk that it won't, because I've seen a lot of critics out there already saying that they refuse to even watch it because of the subject matter. And I'm like, all right, well then you're not into cinema, because cinema should be able to go anywhere. It should be able to explore any topic. It should be able to explore any topic in any style imaginable, and people can either reject it or embrace it or whatever. But when people voluntarily castrate themselves intellectually and just say, oh, I'm not going to even allow myself to see something like that, well, then I got no use for those people. I need to have my intellect and my imagination challenged and stimulated, and this movie absolutely succeeded on at all the above. And I just hope I haven't oversold this, but who knows? Maybe some people will be like, hey, you were downplaying it, or you were underselling it. It's even better than you said. At any rate, I can't wait to watch it again. But before I go, let me do a quick bit of advertising, because for 5 more days, it's summer. So if you have not heard already, it's smooth sack summer. When you're playing in what remains of the summer sun, make sure you're scaped from pubes to bum. That's right, this is the summer to keep your balls cool while still looking hot with Manscaped. The leader in below-the-belt grooming is making sure we all have a ball this summer by giving our pants partners everything they need to stay fresh. Dive headfirst into smooth sack summer by going to manscaped.com for 20% off, plus free shipping with our code WRONGREEL. That is WRONGREEL in all caps. That is my podcast. Check that out as well. And who knows, if Andrew Dominik ever gives you a call and asks you to be in one of his movies, you better be Manscaped, because as we saw in Blonde, there's nudity aplenty. And anyway, I just can't wait to see the wide array of reactions that I'm sure are coming this movie's way in a very short time. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. But I hope everyone has a great weekend. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.